presentation on the power of data, benchmarking for gender equality and women's empowerment by Ms. Paula Newby and Ms. Kirsten Westholter. Give me a moment. As a joint CEO and founder of Predixa, Paula draws on a wealth of experience from over 30 years in large blue chip firms, SMEs, and as an entrepreneur. An innovative thinker with an excellent ability to lead and inspire at all levels, Paula brings wide-ranging skills complemented by deep knowledge in design, retail, manufacturing, and supply chain management. Predixa, with the support of Microsoft, has developed the world's first gender equality women's empowerment application in line with its SDG 5 that provides a give inclusion, I hope I pronounce it right, benchmarking as well as alignment to the 7 women's empowerment principles supported by UN Women and the Global Compact for companies of all sizes and industries. And Kirsten brings over 20 years of experience in business process involvement, improvement, project management, and strategic transformation. She is a results-driven and goal-oriented strategy consultant supporting organizations to achieve their diversity, equity, and inclusion objectives and to embrace a continuous improvement approach. She believes in a focus on what needs to improve as well as on the celebration of successes. Kirsten is a true advocate for thinking out without a box and therefore often includes design thinking principles in her approach. In her view, innovative and disruptive technologies can make companies future-proof. Thank you so much for joining us today. Over to you for your presentation on the power of data, benchmarking for gender equality and women's empowerment. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Aparna. And I speak for Kirsten and I. We're delighted to be here to share our passion, frankly, of using the power of data, both internal and external benchmarking to successfully achieve implementation of SDG 5 and gender equality and women's empowerment. Now, I make no apology for the fact that there may be a little bit of overlap with some of the information that we've already heard from our other speakers and what we're going to go through, but it's always a dangerous thing to assume that everyone understands and knows everything and knows what the various definitions mean. Perhaps while I'm waiting, we'll just talk about some of the fundamentals. So on the 1st of January 2016, so the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the UN came into force and was adopted by 193 countries. And this was to promote prosperity, end poverty, while protecting the planet, with a view that the goals would be achieved by 2030. And what we want to do is just look at some of the issues of data and benchmarking around SDG 5 and to try and prove to everyone why we believe it is absolutely essential for organizations to create a sustainable business for growth going forward. So as I said, we're just going through the fundamentals of what the UN Sustainable Development Goals are. 193 countries from the 1st of January 2016 to promote prosperity, end poverty, and protect the planet, and achieve those goals, of course, by 2030. But of course, we're looking at SDG 5. Now, we've been talking, obviously, about gender equality. We know that's about treating everyone fairly, regardless of gender. And then this term, women's empowerment, many of your previous speakers have spoken about that. But this is the definition we use, that it's providing women with the means, skills and opportunities to gain control over their lives, make their own choices, and achieve their potential in society. And we find actually with our clients that this term empowerment can be quite an emotive word because it has that word power in there and sometimes can be seen almost a battle of the sexes. And some of the women that we speak to don't feel comfortable with that term either. So we always make the point, there is no threat to men. It's not about taking anything away from men, but we often talk about actually realizing women's potential. That's what women's empowerment means for us. And to actually realize SDG 5, it requires the cooperation and collaboration of 3 elements. It requires action from government, from society, and from commerce or business. And what we want to do is talk very much about how this can be affected by business. So the SDG 5 is broken into 9 sub-targets, and we believe of these 9, 4 of them are particularly referenced relevant to business. Clearly, there is the ending of discrimination and treating women equally with equity in pay and benefits. Then there's the opportunity to allow women to reach their potential and be part of and participate in leadership, management, and decision making. Then the third one is to really promote the empowerment of women through upskilling and technology so that they can really take control of their lives and be able to reach their full potential, of course. And then finally, it's about organizations adopting policies and legislation to enforce gender equality and make sure that this happens. But of course, the key thing now is, why is SDG 5 so important now? Well, let's look at some of this data and why it's so important for creating sustainable businesses. Now, some of this has already been referenced, but it's important to talk about it. The pandemic has absolutely affected women disproportionately to men. And the ILO, the International Labour Organization, has estimated that women have accounted for 2/3 of the global jobs lost during the pandemic. Obviously, that's down to things like they've had to be at home to look after children when schools have gone into lockdown. The factories have closed where they've had their manual jobs, and then those more lower paid but customer facing jobs in places like the food and beverage industry, the beauty industry, and whatever, as restaurants and salons, etc., have closed. So women have been disproportionately affected than men. And then also the gender gap has widened. Gender gap is defined as the differential between men and women in terms of their impact with health, education, economics, and politics. And this gender gap has widened since the pandemic. Now, pre-pandemic, it was expected to close in 99 years. But because of the pandemic, the World Economic Forum is now estimating it's going to take 125 years to close the gender gap if we do not act. And of course, what that means is that that's not going to be our children or our grandchildren or our great-grandchildren. It will take until our great-great-grandchildren are around for that gender gap to close if we do nothing, which of course is appalling. So the other thing that's really driving this agenda are the demographic groups of millennials and Generation Zs. These are people who would be defined as ranging from about age 16, 17 up to early 40s. And these two groups are estimated to represent 75% of the global workforce in 10 to 15 years. And they want to work in companies that have an authentic purpose, with a moral compass that is pointing in the same direction as theirs, and they want to work in organizations that reflect the world that they live in and with equal opportunities for all. So there's work to be done to get the women back from the workplace who have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. We need to close that gender gap far quicker than 125 years. But the workforce is changing. The future of workforce in globally is driving a new agenda and is changing our attitudes. So let's look now at SDG 5 and why it's good for us to really get behind this. Well, the first thing is, it's actually, of course, it's good for the economy. And again, the World Economic Forum, along with various other surveys, have estimated that if we achieve gender parity at work, that means men and women are actually treated equally, and there's a balance of men and women in the workforce, that by 2025, in 4 years' time, if there was the same number of men and women in the workforce globally, it would add an extra 26% or $28 trillion to the global GDP. And if we just look at a country like India using the same metrics, again, if we had gender parity at work, then that would add 18% or $770 billion to the GDP of the country. So with this opportunity, why wouldn't businesses and governments and society try to work together, because everyone is going to benefit if we can get more women back into the workplace. Now, SDG 5 has also been proven to be good for the boardroom and management. So it's shown that those companies with a higher share of women in the boardroom get a 41% better return on equity, a 56% improvement on operating results, which of course is absolute wonderful news to shareholders, and they are often the people who are driving that agenda. It has also shown that if you have one woman on the board, then there's a 23% better chance of promotion for women elsewhere in the organization. And gender diverse companies have shown to provide a 15% better performance than their non-gender diverse peers. And if you have 10% of female managers, you can achieve 40% higher sales than if there were only 5% female managers in the organization. And even Warren Buffett, you know, I don't know whether he's still the richest man in the world. I think he's been knocked off his pedestal, but he still wields a lot of influence. He is getting right behind women's empowerment. He recognizes its value, and he's mentioned that in his recent letter to shareholders. So people are beginning to wake up to the fact that SDG 5 is also good for the boardroom and for management. But it's also good for the workplace, because it is shown to help with the cultural health and well-being of the workplace. And they've shown that with a higher percentage of women in the workplace, there's generally greater job satisfaction. There's better commitment to the organization. There's increased focus on the work that needs to be done. As a result of this, there's less burnout, there's less absenteeism. You're gaining higher staff retention. And of course, that means that's impacting your profit, because you're not having to spend as much money on trying to recruit people. You're not having to spend money on covering the absenteeism and the loss in performance. People experience a better work-life balance with a more inclusive workforce, and they feel there is an increased chance to make a difference. And women are often described as homemakers, but it seems to us that we could also call them work makers. And then finally, it's actually SDG 5 is good for business growth. And some fascinating stats here, that in developed economies, it turns out that women make most of the decision making. Now, I wonder, what would be your guess as the percentage of decision making of daily purchases that are made by women? Maybe you think, I don't know, 30% of daily purchases are made by women, 35%? Well, it's 70%. And what's very surprising, I think, that again, in developed economies, it's 68% of car decision purchases are made by women. 93% make food purchases. That's perhaps not so strange. 92% decide on holidays and recreational activities. But this is staggering. 91% of people believed from this data and research that the marketing for business and the product design does not meet their needs. So isn't that extraordinary that you've got a target market of women who are making the majority of decision making in terms of purchasing, and yet the product design and the marketing campaigns that are designed to reach them are not meeting their needs. So here's an opportunity, by ignoring really getting the female employees to feel very included, supported, valued, supported by an inclusive culture, then let those female experiences and opinions and views bubble to the surface and help to create products, services, and marketing campaigns that are better matched to the target audience. But at Predixa, we're really passionate, as you can tell, about data and benchmarking, aren't we, Kirsten? What's your view?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Paula. So you all heard like quite a lot of research data really focusing on the benefits of gender equality and more women in business. However, there's also the topic or issue actually, as we see, of benchmarking. And we can talk about both external benchmarking and internal benchmarking, but I would like to start with what we actually see and think about external benchmarking. What we do see in our practice that many companies are seeking to improve the gender equality in their organizations consistently by making the same mistake. They actually look at addressing the symptoms instead of looking at the root causes. And some examples there, what we do see is that a lot of executives in companies really focus on their demographic data in the company and also try to align it or check it with external data, so with an external benchmark, which is actually also comparing apples with pears. And often here, external stakeholders push companies to focus on the quotas, and they are insisting on meeting the targets way too quickly. And what you could see in companies is that executives are starting to focus on things like a quicker employment, demographic recruitment, and actually trying to quickly fix the quotas without looking at what is really happening in an organization and what are the issues, what are the root causes for instance, for a non-inclusive culture. What we see, if they boost their figures that quickly, you're actually like more box ticking instead of working again on the root cause. And as Paula said before, the new generations, so the Generation Z and the millennials, they do want to feel right in an organization. And if they don't feel treated right, or if they see things are happening which go against their beliefs, their true beliefs, staff will get disillusioned and actually leave the company. This is also where we come to our idea of where we see that internal benchmarking is way better. So how we see it is that to ensure lasting change within organizations, they should actually measure how effective they are themselves in creating that inclusive culture in workplace, where, as we've heard, people are treated equally and feel that they can really bring their true selves to work. And of course, a measurement is also important to understand the baseline. Where are we right now? And if we are measuring maybe in 3 months' time or in half year's time, what has happened with our actions? And as we all say as well, is what we treasure, we measure. And we know that if we measure things, it's more likely to get actions done. So what we believe is that developing internal benchmarks is way more meaningful than actually the vanity metrics. This is more how we see external benchmarking, because often that external benchmarking is really used for the outside world and is not really representing how companies work on their inclusive culture. And we also believe that internal metrics should be revisited often to actually measure the progress, and also to see what happened with your actions, and to be able to communicate your successes to both internal and external stakeholders, and also to demonstrate real authenticity in a culture. And maybe last but not least, also about internal benchmarking. We believe that the problem with the current analysis is that often companies look at interviews, which are very time consuming, and also often a type of personal bias is included. And on the other hand, we see that surveys are used in this analysis, and they are often too shallow because of a flat way of presenting. So in fact, Paula, if you can go to the next slide, please. So with Predixa, we actually use the power of artificial intelligence to rapidly analyze the root causes. And we focus upon the key performance indicators of a business. And we do provide and are able to provide the internal benchmarks for real continuous improvement. And what we do, we offer our clients focused and prioritized actions where clients can really indeed look beyond the quota. And by really implementing their actions, we do see that a more authentic and inclusive culture is realized, and that actually, talking about numbers, drives up to 300% return on investment. What we also see is that companies are seen as more empathetic, and that the workforce is more active listening. People, the employees, also understand a company's purpose much better, because we're talking again about that inclusive culture. We're measuring that inclusive culture. And because staff is understanding that company's purpose and they feel much more involved, it actually drives like 4 times higher staff engagement, which is of course fantastic. Furthermore, you can see that also executives can make effective decisions, and really with confidence, because finally they have data which underpin sometimes their like feelings, their ideas, but as we all know, we need data to really drive actions forward. And as already mentioned in the introduction by Aparna, yes, we are quite unique. What we did launch the first global gender equality and women's empowerment measurement and benchmarking application. And we're actually also very proud to share that with you.
Absolutely, Kirsten, thank you. And so, you know, when we've worked with clients, we have the data, we've got our internal benchmarks, but then where to start? Well, of course, that's going to depend on what's been highlighted by our AI engine, and we work closely with the client to work on where to focus. But in the meantime, here is just a few suggestions that have, again, come out of research and sometimes with the clients that we're working for as solutions to help to realize that gender equality, women's empowerment, that SDG 5 initiatives. So the first one is workplace flexibility. That was mentioned earlier by one of our other speakers. And of course, it's highly ironic, isn't it, that pre-pandemic, many organizations were saying, no, we can't have you working from home. You have to be in the office. You have to be seen. That's not going to work any other way for us. Well, of course, you know, we know now that the sky didn't fall down. And in fact, people have found it to be that even more efficient by working from home. And I'm talking about both genders here. I'm talking about men and women. This is about gender equality, isn't it? So workplace flexibility we now know that can happen. And then the next one is concerned with well-being and benefits. The two things that are coming up as majorly important and wanted is sick pay, to be paid when you're ill, and also to have access to quality healthcare. And all of this is linked to this idea of an inclusive culture where people feel that their organization really does care for them and that they are valued as individuals. Of course, equal pay, that's been touched on before. It just seems extraordinary, doesn't it, that if you've got two people who are equally qualified, who are doing the same job, making with the same outcomes, why they shouldn't be paid equally is an absolute mystery. Then there's the issue of having a role that makes a difference. And this comes back to the sort of women's empowerment principles, that giving people the means and the opportunities to be able to take control of their lives and make their own choices, to feel that they can reach their potential. Nobody wants to be sat in doing something that is repetitive and boring. And of course, we know that these repetitive tasks will be replaced by technology, and so they should be, because it is wrong to have an intelligent human being repeating and being very bored and not getting any sense of real purpose out of what they're doing. So having jobs that make a difference, that align with their own purpose that we spoke about earlier. And then real leadership opportunities. This again comes into one of those 9 targets in SDG 5. We've got to get women into leadership opportunities, but what the research is showing is that often they will self-sabotage because they believe that they're not going to be supported, they won't get the proper training, they won't get the mentoring, and that actually they're being set up to fail. So it needs to be real leadership opportunities where they're properly supported. And then finally, of course, the issue of gender neutral recruitment and promotion. And again, that's been mentioned already. There are all sorts of techniques in order to ensure that when it comes to making those decisions about recruitment and promotion, you are just assessing a person on their ability to do the job, and that gender doesn't come into it. I'll just tell you a very lovely story that some of you may know about this issue for the New York Philharmonic Orchestra, which about 10 years ago, they realized that of their professional musicians, that women represented only 5% of their professional musicians. So they decided to hold blind auditions. So the candidates had to play behind the curtain on the stage. They all had to play the same bit of music. So all the horns played the same music, all the clarinets played the same music, etc. And the assessment group could not see, therefore, who was playing. And to make it even more gender neutral, and as a blind audition, the candidates were asked to remove their shoes so that people couldn't tell whether someone was wearing stiletto heels or not. And of course, the end result was that their 5% of musicians went up to 30%. So we have to incorporate various techniques to ensure that we get the very best person for the job, regardless of their promotion.
And Paula, just to add something there,
yep.
I really love that example that you're giving there. And yes, not new to me, but what I want to emphasize here also for our audience, it's always good also to think about other actions and maybe very bold ideas how to actually promote gender equality or being able to improve that. And as was said like earlier, a technique to do that is, for instance, like completely thinking out of the box or without a box. I prefer to say that. And nothing is wrong. So I would really urge people to start thinking and have bold ideas and start sharing that as well within your community. And you never know with which great ideas you will come up.
Absolutely. Brainstorming. We always talk about we start with an inclusive culture where everybody feels valued, where everyone, as Kirsten said earlier, can bring their whole self to work, where therefore, when they feel supported in an inclusive culture, then you can take advantage of the diversity of thought, where whether it be by different gender, by different age, whichever way, this diversity of the workforce feels able to let all of these ideas bubble to the surface. And that is what drives innovation. That's what drives understanding of your customers and target market. That's what drives better performance. That's what means you get better sales and you get better profit. And as our approach is always about, it has to hit as as Kirsten said, the KPIs, the key performance indicators, and the business case. Because at the end of the day, a sustainable business is one that, yes, makes profit, but works for the change for better. So we've just given you a few examples of the substantial evidence of data to show that actually the time is now for SDG 5. And I always say that this train is leaving the station. The workforce is changing. And we mentioned about the millennials, etc., demanding change. They want to have an inclusive culture that treats men and women equally. So businesses need to optimize the advantages of providing women with a chance to make their valuable contribution and break through that glass ceiling. So what we've tried to prove is that the principles of SDG 5, when they're linked to the strategic company goals, supported by data to drive authentic internal benchmarks, they then become essential for driving sustainable business growth. So these 30 minutes have gone by in no time at all, and we've only been able to scratch the surface. But if you wish to understand more about our approach and some of the issues raised, please do reach out to us via LinkedIn or email to Kirsten and myself. And we hope that you've enjoyed that.
Thank you so much, Ms. Paula Anibai and Ms. Kirsten for that wonderful session. I think what you guys are doing is amazing. And as you said, the time is now for SDG 5, and businesses need to give women a chance to reach their potential. GCPIT is honored to have you with us today. And thank you so much for all the support by Predixa, by partnering in this summit as well. Thank you so much to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.